Hey, YouTube family, how's everybody doing? Uh, Today I'm going to continue on my series that I started on Puerto Ricans during the Korean War. My last videos, I did a video about the contributions from all four services, from the Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines while they were fighting in the Korean War. This part is going to talk about the 65th Infantry Regiment of Borinqueneers. Before I move forward, please like and subscribe, a brand new channel, and your subscription will make this channel grow. Now, this is going to be a brief summary. If I was actually going to talk a lot about the 65th, it can actually take more than 2 hours. So I'm going to try to make it as short as possible, maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes. I apologize if it goes a little bit too long, but here goes. The 65th Infantry Regiment, known as the Borinqueneers, fought with exceptional courage during the Korean War. The 65th originated from Puerto Rico's 1st Infantry Battalion, called the Puerto Rico Infantry Battalion, U.S. Army. Back then, at the turn of the century, maybe they couldn't pronounce Puerto Rico, but they made it the Porto, P-O-R-T-O, Rico Infantry Battalion. That's the name of the 1st Infantry Battalion from Puerto Rico. Now, when they went to Korea, they faced the bullets of war, of course, but also the sting of discrimination. The Borinqueneers suffered the same discrimination as any segregated unit during that time of history. Now, their actions earned them 9 Distinguished Service Crosses, 250 Silver Stars, 600 Brown Stars, and 4,000 plus Purple Hearts. Now, when the 65th Infantry deployed to Korea, they needed a name. And the way the name Borinqueneers came about was they started to think about their history. And Puerto Rico, in the past, had many pirates. And they thought about the name of the Buccaneers. So they figured, well, let's try with the island being called Boricua, Boring. Let's try to combine them. So they came up with Borinqueneers, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, when they deployed to Korea, they went on ships. Their first stop was Panama Canal, and then they embarked to go to Korea. They had 2 infantry battalions and plus headquarters and support units. They had about 3,000 men, give or take 3,000 to 5,000, that deployed. And due to rotations, casualties, and replacements, nearly 20,000 Puerto Ricans served in the regiment. In other words, what I'm trying to say, in a 3-year period between 1950 and 1953, there was about 20,000 soldiers total that served in the Borinqueneers. But originally, it deployed between 3,000 and 5,000 soldiers. Now, when they deployed, they actually went on their own. They were assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, but at the time, the 3rd Infantry Division was in Japan, getting ready to go to Korea, and they were training. So they joined the 65th later on. Now, I'm going to just briefly talk about some of the major battles of the 65th. The first one I'm going to talk about is called the Battle of the Kum River, and that took place in July of 1950. The 65th helped delay the advancing North Korean forces during the early days of the war, despite being lightly armed and lacking full combat experience. The Borinqueneers held defensive positions to protect the retreat of the other U.S. units. So the U.S. units were withdrawing and the North Koreans were advancing. And they withdrew all the way to Busan. Now, Busan happens to be the second largest city of South Korea. It is actually almost on the southern border of Korea. They actually pushed the UN forces that far. Now, between August and September 1950, the 65th held the southernmost line of the defense during the North Korean invasion. They defended supply lines and protecting the last foothold in South Korea before the UN forces counterattacked. Now I'm going to go to the Battle of Incheon and the liberation of Seoul. Seoul happens to be the capital of South Korea, and this took place between September of 1950. Now, after the amphibious landing at Incheon by General MacArthur, the 65th took part to liberate Seoul. They pushed north alongside U.S. and Allied forces, pushing the North Koreans to the 38th parallel, which is the 38th parallel is the border between North and South Korea. So finally, the 65th and the Allied forces are pushing north. In other words, they're on the attack now, and the North Koreans are withdrawing. Now, they went so far, they advanced all the way to the Yalu River, October, November 1950, which is in the proximity of the Chinese border. The 65th drove north, nearing the Chinese border. It was during this time the Chinese entered the war in force, launching a major counteroffensive. I guess the Chinese felt, you guys went too far. You're already at our doorsteps. If that is the case, we're going to go ahead and get involved in the war and to support North Korea. Now, I'm going to move a little bit further in the future and go all the way to the battle of that took place in the Chosin Reservoir, and that took place between 1950 and 1951. Now, the Marines, they were overwhelmed by the Chinese, and they were completely surrounded. So the command was given to them to withdraw to the Hunnam Harbor so they could evacuate on Navy ships. So the regiment was given the mission to cover the retreat of the UN forces at Hunnam. They acted as a rearguard action in freezing conditions while under attack by overwhelming Chinese force. So as the Marines withdraw, which included the 7th Infantry Division and also the Borinqueneers Division, the 3rd, they chose the Borinqueneers to block the Chinese, so the withdrawal was able to take place. And the withdrawal was all the way to the Hunnam Harbor, where they will board ships to be evacuated. When they got to the Hunnam Harbor, the evacuation was over 150,000 U.S. troops, 17,500 vehicles, and 350,000 tons of equipment, plus 100,000 North Korean civilians. So they had 100,000 refugees that needed to be evacuated. The evacuation was completed by December 24, 1950, which was considered a major logistical success. The 65th ensured that not a single UN soldier was left behind. So when they got to the Hunnam Harbor, they boarded the ships. First was the Marines, then first was the civilians. I take that back. Then the Marines, then the 7th Army Infantry Division, followed by the 3rd Infantry Division, and the last to actually evacuate was the 65th. It was called the Miracle of Christmas. Now I'm going to move forward to the Battle of Hill 180, the bayonet charge, the famous bayonet charge, which took place February 2nd, 1951. It is actually considered the last battalion-sized bayonet charge in U.S. Army history. Now, Captain Luis R. Moreno was ordered to seize Hill 180. Now, they were all pinned. They were all pinned down. I guess the Puerto Ricans got tired of being pinned down, and the order was given to fix the bayonets. They charged uphill through heavy fire, engaging in close quarter combat. In other words, folks, hand-to-hand combat. The charge was successful, and the enemy forces were driven from the hill. So that is the famous battle of the famous battalion-sized bayonet charge. I'm going to go a little forward. In September 1952, I'm going to talk about the Battle of Outpost Kelly. The 65th attempted to hold a vital hilltop position over several days, and they were forced, they faced, I'll say again, relentless Chinese attacks. The unit suffered severe casualties and were eventually forced to withdraw. Over 70 Borinqueneers were killed in the fighting of Outpost Kelly. Um, I've heard many stories from Borinqueneers themselves that explain to me that the Chinese used to attack in mass attacks. And it was even said that the Chinese soldiers in the front, when they made their attack, were the ones with the weapons. And the ones that followed behind had no weapons. So as the Chinese soldiers fell wounded or killed, the ones in the back picked up their weapons and continued the charge. So, I mean, I guess that's what happened in that hill. They were overwhelmed. Hey, when you run out of bullets, what you're going to do? You're going to have to leave your ground and withdraw. Now, the Battle of Jackson Heights, which took place shortly after that in October 1952. Still recovering from the Battle of Outpost Kelly, the regiment was ordered to defend another vulnerable outpost. Facing heavy bombardment, poor conditions, and lack of support, some soldiers retreated. This led to mass court-martials, and the battle became a symbol of racial injustice and leadership failure, later corrected and acknowledged by the Army. Later, the Army dropped the charges on the court-martials. After the investigation, they figured that the soldiers that were in that battle, a lot of them had really no training, just basic training, and it just happened to fall at the time of rotations, and so in other words, what I'm trying to say is they made a policy that the soldiers that were there for a significant amount of time, it was time for them to go home. So what that happened was a lot of the trained leadership and trained combat soldiers left, and included the NCOs and officers. And what was left was a lot of soldiers that basically, a lot of them only had basic training. So during that battle, they really had no leadership to lead them to maintain that hill. And I guess a lot of soldiers panicked and retreated under fire. And the Army, after the investigation, they figured that that was one of the main causes, and they dropped the court-martial charges. Now I'm going to talk about two badasses. Sergeant First Class Modesto Cartagena was one of the most highly decorated soldiers of the 65th. He was born July 21, 1921, in Calle, Puerto Rico. He served in World War II and Korea. He was nicknamed the one-man army of the Korean War. Now, his platoon was pinned down by machine gun fire and mortar fire. Cartagena crawled forward alone under heavy enemy fire. Armed with only grenades and his rifle, he charged multiple machine gun nests. He silenced 5 of them by himself. He refused evacuation despite being wounded. So, despite being wounded, he just stood his ground. Now, during his time in Korea, he had earned a Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and multiple campaign and service medals. The legacy is that he is the most decorated Puerto Rican soldier of the Korean War. A statue in his honor stands in Calle. His story was actually highlighted during the Borinqueneers Gold Congressional Medal ceremony, honoring the Borinqueneers in Washington, D.C. It is also said that he was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but I don't know what happened with that. I guess it never went through. The next badass is Master Sergeant Juan Negron from Curazao, Puerto Rico, distinguished himself by extraordinary heroism in action against the enemy in Kalma-eri, Korea, on 28 April 1951. Sergeant Negron took up the most vulnerable position in his company's exposed right flank. After the enemy force had overrun a section of the line, his company was withdrawing, but he refused to leave his position. He delivered withering fire at hostile troops who had broken through a roadblock. When the hostile troops approached his position, Sergeant Negron hurled hand grenades at short range. Halting their attack, he held his position through the night. While an Allied counterattack was organized and launched, at daybreak, 15 enemy soldiers were found dead only a few short feet from his position. He received a Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on April 28, 1951, and on March 18, 2014, it was upgraded to the Medal of Honor by President Obama. Another badass. I mean, there's some others, but I just highlighted those two. Now, I'm going to end this with a summary of what General Douglas MacArthur said about the 65th. And this is what he said. The Puerto Ricans of the gallant 65th Infantry on the battlefields of Korea, by valor, determination, and a resolute will to victory, gave daily testament to their invincible loyalty to the United States. They write a brilliant act of achievement in battle, and I am proud indeed to have them in this command. I wish that we might have more like them. I say again, and this was his exact words, I wish that we had more like them. In other words, he knew the accomplishments of the 65th, and he wished that his whole command was just like the Borinqueneers. I'm going to end it like this, and like I said, this is a brief summary. Please like and subscribe on this channel. The next time I'm going to talk about the Puerto Ricans of Vietnam. But I will say this about the Borinqueneers. Like I said, if I really concentrated on talking about all their accomplishments, this will be at least a 2-hour video. And I truly believe that after earning the Gold Congressional Medal, there should be a movie about them. I mean, there's a movie about the Navajo Code Talkers, the Muskegee Airmen, and the 6888, which is the Black African Woman unit, that they also made a movie on Netflix. And I just hope that one day somebody with money and motivation can produce a movie to honor these Borinqueneers, so that way the story can be told of these heroes of Puerto Rican heritage. So again, thank God, like and subscribe, and into the next video, Puerto Ricans in Vietnam.